Hello, I am Valerie Bird Fort, an instructor at the University of South Carolina and part of the Get Ready, Stay Ready Community Action Toolkit team. I'm pleased to welcome Thomas Flatting, who is leading us in a series on crisis and reputation management for school and public librarians. Flatting serves as managing partner for Hennis Communications, which is a team of award-winning journalists, highly experienced in public relations and reputation enhancement. The Crisis Communication Training Series will help you and your library team develop strategies for responding to any crisis, big or small, making sure you arrive on the other side with your reputation preserved and even enhanced. All of these sessions have been recorded and are housed on the Get Ready, Stay Ready webpage. This evening, we will have our last session in the series titled Taking Control of Q&As. There will be time for questions at the end, and this presentation is recorded. So now I'll turn it over to our speaker. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. So as we've been discussing now for 3 weeks, as folks running public libraries, for I think the last couple of years, you guys have been facing tougher and more persistent questions than has perhaps ever been the case in your careers. We want to end this series today talking about a series of simple, pragmatic steps that we think you can apply to be more effective in a Q&A situation. At Hennis, we call this media training, and we do conduct it to help prepare folks for media interviews. As you'll remember, I was 33 years in media as an editor and a reporter. So especially in my years as a reporter, I literally did thousands of interviews. It was my job to control those interviews. Even if you've been interviewed what you would consider a lot, you run into a veteran reporter like I was, and that scale is going to be heavily weighted in my favor. What today is all about is how to prepare and practice and use these preparatory steps to help even out that scale. And while we do call it media training, it's equally applicable to any situation where you may face a Q&A, whether that's one-on-one with a patron, in a community forum, meeting with your board, any place where you're subject to being asked questions. We think these techniques can help. We call them the control tools. And the number one thing we stress is that we don't think anyone should enter into a Q&A session without being armed with key messages. What are key messages? Well, they are what you most want people to remember when they're at that Q&A, after they read that story, after they see that broadcast, after they've attended that community forum. They're what we used to call in my former business the walk away. What do you want people to remember when they walk away from this Q&A? Key messages, they should reflect your public library's mission and values. They are, as we have said all for weeks now, they are truth. They are always truthful, but they are not just statements of fact. They're what you most want people to know about you and your library in this situation. That's why they're particularly applicable to controversies and crisis situations. They are soundbite length. They are punchy. They are memorable. We use the rule of 3. How many key messages should you have going into an interview? We'd say 3. Why? One's not going to be enough to get you through a Q&A, particularly with a reporter, but you get more than 3 and you might not be able to remember them, especially in that kind of rapid fire fog of war that can occur during a media interview or any Q&A situation. What we suggest is if you have an hour to get ready for a Q&A, if you have a day, even better if you have a week, take advantage of that time, sit down with your colleagues at the library and brainstorm, hey, what are the 3 things I'm going to go through this Q&A. What are the 3 things I most want people to take away from this? What do we want to remember? And remember again that they should reflect your values and your mission as a public librarian and as a public library. Okay, so you got those key messages down. They're punchy, they're truthful. They're the things that people are going to remember about this. What do you do then? Well, brainstorm the questions, particularly if it's a media interview, but again, any Q&A, and not the easy ones, not the ones you know you can handle. See if you can come up with the most impertinent, rude, or unexpected questions you possibly can, the ones that you really hope you don't get, because then if you get them, you're going to have prepared for them. Now, particularly if it isn't a media interview, if you're dealing with a reporter, I can tell you, you can go to one of a couple of places to start to think about what that reporter is going to ask. And again, it all starts, this will not be a surprise to anyone who sat through any of these other sessions. It starts with social media. If this is a situation, if you're being interviewed about a situation that was in any way playing out on social media has become a tip sheet and a source list for reporters. I'm going to go check out and see what people are saying about this situation on social media. And I'm going to build questions right from that. I may take questions directly from what people are asking on social media. So you should review social media if there are comments about this situation there. By the way, I'm also going to go to your social media, both the library's social media channels and your private social media, if I can get to it. And I'm going to see what you do there and what you're saying. So social media is one. Number two, I'm going to know your history. I'm going to know your public library's history. So if this situation has come up before or something similar to it, or you've had other controversies, or you just had a tough tax levy, I'm going to know all those things. So you need to know. And by the way, I don't care if you've been at this public library for 6 months or 36 years. They give you to me as a source, you inherit the history. And I'm going to know it, so you need to know it. Third, and this sounds simplistic, but people forget it, I'm going to scour your website. So you need to remind yourself what's on your website. What are you saying about yourself? What is the public library saying about itself on that website? And how could that lead to questions that you may face? We do a lot at Hennis. We do a fair amount of work with heavy construction firms, because obviously that's dangerous work, and accidents do occur and people get injured, and sometimes sadly people die on workplace sites. Inevitably, you have a serious injury or you have deaths in that kind of situation. I will go to that company's website and it will have them blazoned across the homepage. We put safety first. Well, guess what? One of the questions that CEO is going to face is going to be, you put safety first, it says on your website. How'd that work out for you today? So you can prepare for that. So know what's on your own website. Again, brainstorm with colleagues. Hey, what do you think? What would you ask me if you were in this situation? What do you think we're going to get asked? Once you have those questions, obviously, what are effective answers? Well, effective answers in any situation, but especially a media situation, they're brief. If it's legal, moral, and ethical to answer the question, we think you should answer the question. Don't dodge questions. Don't spin. Spinning is the first cousin of lying, and it will get you in more trouble. But once you have answered the question, stop. And if it is a media interview, stop even when the reporter does this. That was about 5 or 6 seconds. And it always feels like about a minute and a half. It gets uncomfortable, especially in an interview situation. This was one of my favorite techniques when I was a reporter. The person would answer, they would stop, and I would say nothing. And then I would say nothing. And almost inevitably, they felt compelled to fill that vacuum with more information. A lot of times it didn't matter, but sometimes they said things to me that they wish they hadn't. So don't feel compelled. Once you've answered the question, stop. And if you have to get in a staring contest with the reporter, do it. But don't do my job for me. Answer the questions as honestly and transparently as you possibly can, but when you feel like you've answered them, just stop. Effective answers, besides being brief, never speculate. And I'm going to try to get you to speculate, not necessarily because I'm a miserable SOB, although I may be, but because it makes my story more interesting, especially in a crisis or if you're dealing with a problem. You're probably at point A. I want to jump to point J. I want to know whose fault this is. I want to know who's getting fired. I want to know if you're getting sued. I want to know all those things that you probably can't answer at this point. So, by the way, I don't know is a very fine answer. You can't get through an entire interview repeating, I don't know. But if you don't know, you don't know. If you can refer me to somebody who you think might help me get that information, great. If you need some time to gather the information, great. And if you just don't know, you just don't know. And there are many times, especially early on in a crisis, when you don't know, because you don't know what happened. You don't even necessarily know what you're going to do about it. Now, if you say, I don't know, and you do know, and I find out, then it's really going to be game on. But I don't know is a legitimate answer when you don't know. If in the course of asking the question, I get something factually wrong, correct it. Don't let that sit out there. And by the way, one of my other favorite techniques was I used to ask sources questions that I knew were factually wrong to see if they knew and to see if they would correct it. So correct misstatements of fact. If you're in an interview situation, and this includes everybody, but especially with reporters, and let's say you're 2 or 3 questions down the road and you realize how you wish you would have answered that question a few minutes ago, unless you're in a live situation, live TV situation, which is really extreme. And I just can't imagine any of you or very many of you ever being in that situation. But if you want a do-over, ask the reporter for a do-over. 99.9% of reporters I know will do it. I mean, they need you too, right? And they may need to go back to you, especially if it's a controversy or a crisis that's going to be a long, ongoing story. So if you say, hey, Tom, you asked me that question a few minutes ago about book banning. I have a better answer. I'm going to say, lay it on me. Let's go. Now, even if you're effectively answering these questions, you're really doing well, you've anticipated these questions, you have short answers. If all we're doing though is I'm asking questions and you're answering, I'm asking questions and you're answering, that scale still is tipped in my favor. So the other piece of the control tool we strongly recommend people practice is getting back to your key messages, pivoting back to your key messages. And that can be as simple as phrases like you see here. Tom, I can't speculate about that right now, but what I can tell you is, and deliver a key message. The most important thing I want your readers to know about this situation is deliver a key message. That does a couple of things. First, it signals to the reporter what's important. And you have to remember, while this interview may be the center of your day, it's probably one of 5, 6, 7, 10 interviews I'm doing that day. So you give me some key messages that are truthful and make for good quotes, I'm going to be pretty happy, and I'm more likely to stop the interview and move on, which you also would like. But here's the real reason to keep repeating key messages. The most natural thing in the world for me to do as a reporter is to ask you a question, a follow-up question about what I just heard. And if that's off of your key message, now that scale's starting to even out, because that's what you want to talk about. You want to expand on your key messages. You'd love to get questions about your key messages because they're based on your mission, they're based on your values, and those are the things you want to talk about. That's one of the ways that you help take control of an interview. All right. So if you're just delivering key messages, though, even if you're repeating them like I've urged you to do, and you just have key messages, you're going to sound like you're sloganeering. You're going to sound, frankly, like the Sunday morning politicians who are, elected officials and politicians, whatever you think of them. I can tell you they are expert at delivering key messages. Sometimes I don't hear the supporting facts, the examples that illustrate that point, and you have them. You have them in large volumes. Your public libraries, you've been doing this for decades. You have the good works, the best practices to support those key messages. So be ready to trot those out. When I was a young reporter in South Carolina, actually, when I was at the state in Columbia, I was a business reporter for 3 or 4 years. I had been a business reporter for about 3 weeks when it suddenly hit me that every business in North America puts its employees first. Because everybody I interviewed about their business said, Tom, we put our employees first. Well, the 5th time I heard it, it started to not mean a whole lot. And the 55th time I heard it, it meant nothing. But if I was interviewing a CEO and she said, Tom, we put our employees first. And you know what that looks like? We have a scholarship program for employees who want to get a higher degree or their undergraduate degree if they don't have it. And that scholarship program also applies to their kids. And we have a retention rate here of 93%. And 7 of our 9 members of our leadership team, they came up through the ranks. Now it sounds like she puts her employees first because there's meat on that bone. And I'm more likely to use that key message and those supporting facts, which is exactly what she wants me to do. Examples bring messages to life. And it makes it more likely that those people are going to remember and use your key messages. So that's it. That's the control tool summary. It's that simple. On this slide, these slides will be on the Get Ready, Stay Ready Toolkit site, but already there is an expanded version of this. I believe it's 7 pages on preparing for interviews, particularly media interviews. More tips, bridging phrases, a lot of other stuff that I think you'll find you can use. But that, in essence, is how we recommend anyone get ready for any Q&A situation, and especially one involving a journalist in a media interview situation. And with that about Q&As, I welcome any Qs.
Thank you so much. I have not seen any questions come up in the chat yet.
Because I already answered everything.
This was about Q&As, right? So it was full of A's. But if you do have any questions, we'll wait a few moments to see, and you can place them in chat. All right, so I have a few. Great. Maybe more connected to a previous week, tips for communicating with school board. It popped up on me. So tips for communicating with school board: be a frequent speaker just on special occasions, or better to email?
What a good question. So in terms of tips for communicating with the school board, I think it's best to pick your spots, really. There's nothing wrong with being a frequent speaker. It also depends on what you're most comfortable with. I don't try to shoehorn people into communications techniques that they're uncomfortable with. I think everybody can prepare and practice and get better. It's like the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Well, you practice. How do you become a better interviewee? Well, you practice. That said, though, I also want people to be in the form where they're most comfortable. And in this case, I think I might keep my powder a little dry and be a less frequent speaker. But you mentioning that on email reminds me of a tip I forgot, which it's a tip that makes me hold my head in my hands when I think about journalists doing this these days, but they do. Here's one of the ultimate control tools. If you are in a media interview situation, ask the reporter to email you their questions in advance. Now, I can assure you that when I was running newsrooms, we never would have done this, and I would have killed a reporter who did it. But these days, with reporters frequently under the gun, having to post constantly, they're much more likely to do it. And I mean, you want to talk about a way to keep control of an interview. You now have the questions right in front of you. You answer them at your leisure in writing. And by the way, you save that. So if the story doesn't reflect that Q&A, you can publish the Q&A on your website. So anyway, that's the email. And then there was a crazy community member mentioned a librarian by name in his school board community time rant. How to respond. Well, I think that I would probably, here's what we talked about. I think we talked about this in a previous session. When you're dealing with outraged people, arguing with them and correcting them will not make it better. especially in the moment. In fact, they will get angrier. So I would say confronting this person about it, and I'm not saying you're suggesting confronting them, but confronting them about it in that setting probably would make it worse. One of the things I'm going to be thinking about is, first of all, getting to that librarian who was mentioned by name and talking to them about what just happened, talking to the rest of your staff about what just happened, because I want to inoculate the people that are closest to you. We almost always take an inside out strategy to communications, and I want the people who are closest to you, care about you the most, those insiders, to understand your position on this. And then if necessary, I'll take it outside. But what probably wouldn't work is in that public setting, taking this person on, as tempting as it might be. What happens if you misspeak? Ask for a do-over. As soon as you realize it happened, believe it or not, even in 2023, people are pretty forgiving of that. Reporters are pretty forgiving of that. So if you misstate something, misspeak about something, say, you know what? I realize now 10 minutes ago, I screwed up. I said X about Y. Here's what I mean. Now, people, your harshest critics may accuse you of either lying then or lying earlier, but you'll never win them over anyway. You're speaking to those people who either do care about you or are quizzical about how you're handling this situation. And the more authentic you can come off to them, the more authentic you can be to them, not come off, but the more authentic you can be to them, the better. And people do misspeak. So I would just take it on. I'm going to keep going here, Valerie. Awesome stuff. Tying this in with your crisis communications plan chat, would it be smart to have those key messages you've mentioned already part of that plan? Absolutely. Absolutely. Crisis communication plans are built around key messages. So if you think that you're subject to facing a activist who may want a book ban, if you think you're subject to activists who may want to take you on over LGBTQ issues, then get your key messages together now about that. Put them in a crisis communications plan, even if it's not a formal thing. Put them somewhere you can get to them. Brainstorm them now with your staff. Do that work ahead of time, and you'll have used peacetime wisely. And then when the bullets start flying, you'll be all that much better prepared. And then if the local media wants to interview you about it, ta-da, you already have key messages. So those are great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. And thank you so much for the series. It's been really powerful, really important. And like we've said before, the recordings are on the Get Ready, Stay Ready Community Toolkit website, and stay tuned for more from our team in the future. And I thank you so much for all of this, and thank you all for being here. And if you have any other questions, we're here, and have a great night.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you all for taking this time. I really do appreciate it. I hope that was helpful. And we're friends now. So if you ever need any other advice, you know how to get in touch with me. I always have my cell phone.